Hello, Merry Meet. So I wanted to discuss sort of myth that have a tendency to pop up when it comes to tarot card and oracle decks, and that is the myth that if you're a beginner, you should start with oracle decks because they're simpler. And I sort of don't agree with that, and I want to make my point. Basically, the idea behind this myth is this. Since most oracle decks have fewer cards than a tarot deck, it is so much easier to learn. And this to me is a very unenlightened point of view. Because here's the thing. First of all, it's a little bit like saying it's better to learn Klingon than to learn Spanish because there are fewer words. Yeah, but what are you gonna use Klingon for? Now, nothing wrong with learning Klingon. If you do a lot of Star Trek role-playing or cosplaying, or you're a huge Star Trek fan, then learn Klingon all you want. But if what you are trying to do is to learn to talk with as many people as possible, then learning the second most spoken language in the world might be a better choice. Same thing. An oracle deck is a contained system. In fact, let me try to phrase it this way. Tarot decks are also oracle decks. Lenormand are oracle decks. All of them are oracle decks. They are cartomancy systems. However, what we usually refer to as an oracle deck is one contained system that is just that deck and usually the book that comes with it. So learning that you will only be able to draw from that book and whatever your own experiences and intuitions say. That's it. That's the system. It is contained to that, and spending the time to learn that system will just then teach you to use that contained thing. By learning the tarot, then that opens up it's the most used cartomancy system, at least in the West. And it opens you up to so much knowledge because there's so many different ways to use the tarot. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of books on it, different methods to use for reading it. Not to mention that it ties into the Kabbalah, it ties into numerology, it ties into Western occultism. There's a vast field of knowledge centered around the tarot that you gain access to by learning that. So while it might take a little bit longer to learn 78 cards than 50 around there where most oracle decks are, you get so much more with the tarot. So yeah. The other thing is that once you have learned how to do cartomancy, and that is the divination by cards, then you sort of have it much easier learning other systems. For example, I have started to look into learning Lenormand now, and it's so much easier for me to get going with that now that I actually know how to read the tarot, because I sort of already have the basics from there, and then learning a new set of cards and so on and so forth just it goes more intuitively. I guess it's a little bit like if you know how to play an instrument, it's generally easier to learn to play another instrument than if you have never played anything. So it is actually easier for you to then, if you find an oracle deck that you really like, learning to use that if you already know the tarot. the tarot gives a very good base for starting with cartomancy. And really, it's not that much more work to learn 78 cards than 50 or 40 or 60 or however many there are in your chosen deck. So yeah, now of course it depends. What are you looking for? Why do you want to get a deck of cartomancy cards and start reading? If your only desire is to have a fun little hobby that you can play around with when at parties and so on and tell the love fortunes of your friends and relatives, then it doesn't matter what system you use. Just pick something, and then I guess doing a oracle deck is just fine and works just as well, and you might as well take the simplest one. And a lot of oracle decks are very, very simple. They're very straightforward. You might have cards like good fortune, and they mean exactly that, good fortune. There's very little fuss and two ways about it. So yeah. However, if, as this myth usually say, for a beginner, being a beginner, that usually indicates that you are trying to get better, then I would say start with the tarot, because that gives you a very, very good base. So yeah, and like I always say when people say what deck should I begin with, I say start with the Rider-Waite deck. It's not the most exciting deck. I personally do not think the Rider-Waite is a very pretty deck. It's not a deck now that I've been reading for a while I use a lot. But it gives you it's a very good starter deck, because so many decks are based around the symbology presented in that deck. So if you know that, it becomes a key to open up so many other decks. So I would say, if you want to start with any form of cartomancy, get a good tarot book and get a Rider-Waite deck. And it's not that hard. First of all, here's the thing. You do not need to know all the card meanings before you start reading. I have always been a big fan of learning by doing, so just start doing readings, have the book there, and just go by the book as you read. Try to do a daily reading or something like that, because then each card comes up with such a regularity that as you go through this, you eventually learn those meanings. And also, if you look at the cards, look at their names and so on and so forth, it is somewhat easy to understand at least the base symbology. Let's take a card, Two of Cups. Generally speaking, it shows a loving couple. It shows basically scenes of love and romance. It's very easy then to see that that card stands for that. Or let's have Strength, that usually show a woman taming a lion. It's not that difficult to get that it stands for willpower, strength of character, and courage. And so on and so forth. Granted, it's not all the cards that have that obvious meanings, but it's not that difficult to figure it out either. So, really, no, I don't really recommend people starting with an oracle deck. I did actually start with an oracle deck because I was very young when I started, and I found a deck that came free with one of those ladies' magazines that my grandmother liked to read. So I just cut that deck out of that magazine. And I think it's 30 cards or something like that. Or is it 24? I don't remember, but these tiny little cards. And there were a couple of pages with instructions, so it sort of just fell into my lap that way. But when I was 15, my mother got me a tarot deck and a tarot book, and I just went from there. It gives a very good base. It's a little bit with any skill that you want to acquire, you want to start with the basics. And really, when it comes to Western cartomancy, tarot are the basics. Now, you might want to look at, if you absolutely want to start with a system that has fewer cards, I would not recommend any of the, what's her name again? Doreen Valiente, how is it to be pronounced? The one that makes all the angel books. One of her decks, or any of these various angels and mermaids and so on and so decks. But not that bad. I have quite a few of those decks. I love Oracle decks, don't get me wrong. But I wouldn't recommend starting with those, because they don't go into depth, they don't give you a good base. But if you want one with fewer cards, I would actually recommend the Lenormand, because there are far fewer cards than the tarot, and it's a pretty simple system, but at the same time it is more developed than most of these Oracle decks, and there's a big backing around it. You can find a lot of books on the topic. It's also a system that will give you a good basics when it comes to cartomancy. So I would say start with one of the established systems, tarot or the Lenormand. And once you have learned to work with one of these basic systems, so you have a base in the art of cartomancy, then you can get some Oracle decks and see if some of them fit you. Because it is fun with Oracle decks, especially because really each one of them are their own little system, so you can find some really amazing ones there that really fit you. And when somebody's designing Oracle deck, they have much more freedom than when they're designing a tarot, because a tarot has a certain guideline for it to be a tarot. The same with the Norman deck. But when you are making an Oracle deck, you can do whatever you want, and that can make some very, very interesting decks. So, I mean, I think that my favorites are the Viking cards, the Oracle of Light and Shadow, and the Mary Magdalene Oracle. And no, it's I just can't remember exactly who made those, but just Google those and that'll pop up. Those are the ones that I prefer. They fit me very well. I get pretty accurate readings with them. But yeah, you can. It's definitely okay to read with Oracle decks, but don't fall into the trap of thinking that no, because there are fewer cards, it's easier to learn. It really isn't, because it gives you so much less. It's much better to have the backing of the very well-established tarot, because then you learn how to read cards. Your mind gets used to it, of how to see a meaning when you see a layout. And it's so much easier to get that with an established system, in my opinion, than to first start with an Oracle deck, and then you sort of have to do all the work over again if you later want to start with a tarot or the Lenormand. However, if you have started with one of the established systems, it's just easier to go on to another one. It's a little bit like learning a language from a same language group or family as one you already know. For example, if you know Latin, it's easier to learn Italian because the languages are closely related. So it's a little bit of the same. It just makes it easier. And like I said, if you feel daunted by learning 78 cards, then basically read often and just use the guidebook. Do one card a day. Basically, first start with a basic. So basically get yourself a notebook. And then you go into your tarot book and you just write up the most basic meaning of each card. And then each day you go over your notebook and you read those basic meanings. And it doesn't take that long before that information then sticks. And then as that sticks, and then you read more tarot books, it just naturally you learn more about it. And also, don't forget your intuition. There's a lot of intuition going on, and sometimes that's the best way to do it. And also, look at the cards. A lot of the meaning is right there. When you see the happy children dancing under the sun, it's not that difficult to figure out that this means rebirth. It means conception, not necessarily of a child, but of an idea. It means the birth of new things, because there's a child there that very often symbolizes new things. It's not difficult. So just don't be daunted at how many cards there are, and really how much more is 78 than 50. So yeah, my recommendation is that you start with the tarot, learn one of these established systems well, and then move on to oracle cards if you so desire. Well, those are my opinions on that idea. As always, just my opinion. Hope you have enjoyed this video. Have a great day, and blessed be.